Imagine a city gripped by fear, a place where the most vulnerable are not just murdered but erased. Their bodies are found in pieces, scattered like garbage in the forgotten corners of a dying industrial wasteland. The killer is a phantom, a butcher who leaves no clues, only a trail of headless, limbless torsos. And the man tasked with catching him is a legend, a hero who took down Al Capone, but who will find himself haunted by this one unsolvable case. If you have a morbid fascination with the darkest chapters of criminal history and the monsters who write them, subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. The story you are about to hear is one of America's most gruesome and enduring mysteries. Tonight, we travel back to the Great Depression, to the grimy, smoke-choked city of Cleveland, Ohio. We will enter the world of Kingsbury Run, a desolate ravine known as the Hobo Jungle, where a killer with surgical precision preyed on the forgotten souls of a desperate era. This is a story of decapitation, dismemberment, and a police investigation led by the famous Eliot Ness that was taunted and tormented by a ghost. This is the story of the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run, the Cleveland torso murderer. Between 1935 and 1938, a shadow fell over Cleveland. It was a time of unprecedented hardship, the height of the Great Depression. In the industrial valley known as the Cleveland Flats, shanty towns, or Hoovervilles had sprung up, filled with destitute men and women, drifters and vagrants with no work, no money, and no hope. This grim landscape, particularly the area known as Kingsbury Run, became the hunting ground for one of America's most brutal and enigmatic serial killers. He was a monster who didn't just kill his victims, he systematically dismantled them. The official victim count stands at 12, but many investigators believe the true number could be as high as 20 or even 40, with related murders stretching from the 1920s to the 1950s and from Pittsburgh to Los Angeles. The victims were the invisible people of the Depression, the men and women on the fringes of society which made them easy prey. Of the 12 official victims, only 3 were ever identified. The rest remain John and Jane Does, their names lost to history. Their only memorial, a collection of horrifyingly serene death masks made by the coroner. The killer's methods were shockingly consistent and brutally precise, suggesting someone with anatomical knowledge and a steady hand. He always decapitated his victims, severing the head from the body with surgical precision. He often dismembered them completely with the skill of a surgeon or a butcher, sometimes severing the torso in half at the waist, sometimes removing all 4 limbs. In many cases, the cause of death was the decapitation or dismemberment itself, meaning the victims were likely conscious and alive as they were being systematically cut apart, experiencing unimaginable terror and agony in their final moments. Most of the male victims were castrated, their genitals removed with the same methodical precision. Some of the bodies were treated with a chemical that turned the skin tough, red, and leathery, and in at least one case, a body was saturated with oil and set on fire after death. The heads were rarely found with the bodies, often buried separately or never discovered at all, making identification nearly impossible in an era before DNA forensics and with victims who had no one looking for them. The first official victims were discovered in September 1935 in a gully at the base of a place called Jackass Hill. The decapitated body of a man, later identified as Edward Andrassy, was found wearing only socks. He had been emasculated, and there were rope burns on his wrists. Lying near him were the remains of another man, a John Doe, whose body had been doused in oil and set on fire. This was the beginning of a reign of terror that would paralyze the city. Over the next 3 years, the discoveries became more and more gruesome. The dismembered body of Florence Polillo, packed into bushel baskets. The decapitated, tattooed man whose body was drained of blood, before being dumped by the railroad tracks. The killer grew bolder, more arrogant. He was a phantom who moved without being seen, who killed without leaving a trace, and who seemed to revel in his own ghastly work. Enter Eliot Ness. The famed lawman, the leader of the legendary Untouchables who had brought down Al Capone in Chicago, was now Cleveland's public safety director. He was a national hero, a symbol of incorruptible justice, a man who had stared down the most powerful gangster in America and won. But the torso murderer would become his white whale, the one case that would tarnish his legacy and haunt him for the rest of his life. Ness threw everything he had at the investigation. He mobilized the entire police force, brought in federal agents, and personally led raids on the shanty towns, rounding up vagrants for questioning and cataloging their fingerprints. In a desperate and controversial move that shocked the city, he ordered the Hoovervilles of Kingsbury Run to be burned to the ground, destroying the homes of hundreds of destitute people, hoping to drive out the killer's potential victims and force him into the open. The fires burned for days, the smoke visible across the city, a stark symbol of Ness's determination and desperation. The killer's response was one of pure, chilling defiance. In August 1938, just days after Ness's raids, the dismembered remains of 2 victims were found in a dump on East 9th Street, placed in full view of Eliot Ness's office in City Hall. It was a direct personal taunt, a message from the Mad Butcher to the famous lawman. "You can't catch me." The killer would continue to harass Ness for years, sending him threatening and mocking postcards, a constant, tormenting reminder of his failure. The investigation was the largest in Cleveland's history. Over 9,100 people were interrogated, but the police were stymied at every turn. The lack of forensic technology, the transient nature of the victims, and the killer's almost supernatural ability to avoid detection made the case a nightmare. Suspicion eventually fell on a handful of individuals, but one name rose above the rest: Dr. Francis Sweeney. Sweeney was a brilliant but deeply troubled man. A veteran of World War I, he had served in a medical unit, performing amputations on the battlefield, work that required both surgical skill and a certain emotional detachment from human suffering. The horrors of the war had left him a severe alcoholic, suffering from what we would now recognize as severe PTSD. By 1934, his drinking had destroyed his marriage, and he had descended into a life of isolation and despair. He was the first cousin of one of Eliot Ness's political rivals, a powerful congressman who publicly ridiculed Ness for his failure to solve the case, making the investigation a political minefield. Sweeney was interrogated by Ness himself in a hotel room, and according to some accounts, he was so intoxicated that he had to be held for 3 days until he sobered up enough to be questioned. He then failed 2 early polygraph tests administered by the renowned expert Leonard Keeler, who told Ness with certainty that Sweeney was the culprit. But there was no physical evidence to connect him to the crimes, no murder weapon, no witness, nothing that could stand up in court. And with his powerful political connections, a prosecution was deemed impossible. Shortly after being questioned, Sweeney voluntarily committed himself to a mental institution. The murders stopped, and from his confinement, the taunting postcards to Ness began, a cruel reminder of the killer who got away. He was never charged, and he died in a veterans' hospital in 1964, taking his secrets with him. Was Dr. Sweeney the Mad Butcher? The evidence is purely circumstantial, but for many, he remains the most likely suspect. His medical knowledge, his alcoholism, his psychological trauma, and the convenient cessation of the murders after his institutionalization all point in his direction. But without a confession, without a single piece of hard evidence, the case remains officially unsolved. The Cleveland torso murders are more than just a series of unsolved crimes. They are a dark and disturbing window into a forgotten corner of American history. They are a story of a city in crisis, of a legendary lawman pushed to his limits, and of a killer who was as brilliant as he was sadistic. The Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run was a product of his time, a monster born from the despair and decay of the Great Depression. He was a ghost who haunted a city, and who in many ways continues to haunt us today. Who do you think the killer was? Let us know your theories in the comments below. And if you found this story as chilling as we did, please like, share, and subscribe for more tales from the darkest corners of history.